So these people who were writing in Arabic were speaking about ideas of Phoenician descent and Canaanite descent and Syrian descent and Pharaonic descent. Happened to be, not by chance, but happened to be mainly Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire. They were not Muslims. They were non-Muslims, most of them Christians, but there were some Jews among them. The reason for that, there are many reasons for that, but one of the reasons had been that the Muslim subjects of the Ottoman Empire did not need to elaborate on a new history or excavate an old history because they were full members of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire being, a Sunni Muslim empire, they didn't need to elaborate on a different identity separate from that of the empire. The Christians felt threatened by the idea of Turkification. They began elaborating an idea of a kind of identity that was based on a unity of language that was no longer the Turkish language, but that was this new modern standard Arabic language. So the Nahda, the Arabic language or literary Renaissance movement, which had been in the 1880s and 1890s strictly a literary movement, was taken in the 1920s and 1930s by votaries of political Arab nationalism, turned into the early stirrings of Arab nationalism and rebaptized. So the Nahda, the Arabic literary Renaissance movement, was rebaptized in the 1920s and 30s as the Arabic National Renaissance movement. So it was politicized in the 1930s and 20s and 30s, whereas it had been in the 1880s and 1890s a purely literary movement. So the question about the history of these the movements that were rivals of Arab nationalism is, I don't know if I can term those movements rivals of Arab nationalism because they preceded Arab nationalism. There were movements that used the Arabic language as a literary medium to speak of an identity that was neither Arab nor Turkish, but was an ancient identity that preceded Arabs and Turks in the region. So there is a long history for this rivalry, but I'm not sure I can refer to it as a rivalry. I would say that the idea of the Syrian people, or the Phoenician people, or the Canaanite people, or the Pharaonic people, was perhaps a predecessor of Arab nationalism. What I'm proposing in this book is a new reading of the history and the identities of the peoples of the Middle East. Not to challenge the prevalent paradigm, which tends to view the area as this monolith of Arabs and Arabic speakers, but to add or rediscover or re-excavate another layer of identities that are still extant in the modern Middle East, that are not dead. And that is the idea of the imbrications or layering of cultures and identities and languages in the Middle East throughout its millenarian history. We tend today, the prevalent tendency in the academy and outside of the academy today, when we look at the Middle East, we see it as this uniform preserve of Arabs and Arabic speakers. And that is based on the idea that these people use the Arabic language, that the language of their daily parlance is Arabic. That assumption is false for two reasons. One, that there are many languages that are used in the daily parlance in the Middle East. And two, what we refer to as the Arabic language, as this uniform nimbus of Arabness, the symbol of being an Arab, is not a spoken language. Modern Standard Arabic is a learned language. It's a language that nobody acquires natively. people born in Lebanon, Syria, the Palestinian territories, Iraq, grow up speaking a language that is as different, in the words of a Harvard linguist, Wheeler Thaxton, these people grow up speaking natively a language that is as different from what we term Arabic, that is modern standard Arabic, as English is different from Latin. Okay, so if we look at English as the natively acquired language, what we would learn to read and write when we go to school would be Latin. So the various peoples of the Middle East whom we refer to as Arabs actually grow up speaking a variety of languages that we term dialects that are as different from Arabic, modern standard Arabic, as English is different from Latin. So the first assumption was that all of these peoples are users and speakers of the Arabic language, and that is a false assumption because they grew up speaking. There are actually 33 varieties, language varieties, that we refer to as Arabic, and one modern standard Arabic, MSA. These 33, 34 different varieties, some of them are mutually comprehensible. Others are completely incomprehensible. A good analogy would be perhaps living in the border region of France and the Pyrenees region, France and Spain. Villagers living on both sides of the border would be able to understand each other, with each of them speaking their dialect of French and their dialect of Spanish. And the farther away you get from the border, Spanish becomes Spanish and French becomes standard French, and there is no mutual comprehensibility. And that is the case today with many places in the Middle East. So naturally, Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, and some Iraqis can understand each other. And the farther away the Lebanese gets from Lebanon towards North Africa or the Deep Gulf area, you have almost complete linguistic breakdown. This is one problem in looking at the area as this monolithic Arab world. The other problem is that, unlike what we're used to here in the West, referring to people's identities, we have usually cognate words that we use in reference to nationality, ethnicity, language, and territory. In other words, a Frenchman lives in an area called France, a country named France. He is French, he speaks French. So you have the same word you're using to refer to the ethnicity, the nationality, the culture, the territory, and the language. This does not apply to the Middle East. The Middle East has, for millennia, spoken different languages. As I said before, there were layers of cultures and civilizations that have come to the Middle East and controlled the area of the Middle East, with each civilization coming and imposing its language as a lingua franca. So, I'll give you an example. 5,000 years, Sumerians were the peoples that controlled the entire Near East. They emerged from the area of Iraq today and spread all over the region. Sumerians spoke a language that we refer to as Sumerian, which is not a Semitic language. So, in other words, it's not related to any of the native languages that are spoken today in the Middle East. It was not a Semitic language. But Sumerian became a language of empire for about 2 millennia, which meant that people who were bona fide Sumerians spoke Sumerian, and people who were not Sumerians spoke Sumerian. People who did not recognize themselves, did not refer to themselves as Sumerians, spoke Sumerian. This language had, and that culture and that civilization had a long run. After that, it was replaced over time by the Babylonians. The Babylonians also spread their language. It was the lingua franca of the entire Middle East. It was spoken by Babylonians and non-Babylonians alike. Aramaeans came onto the scene and also spread the Aramaic language. So Aramaic became a language that was spoken by many people in the Middle East, namely the Israelites, the Jews, the Hebrews, whose language had initially been Hebrew, a Canaanite language, was replaced by Aramaic. So the Hebrews did not lose their Hebrew identity, their Canaanite identity, if you will, although they made use. I give an example in class to my students about the famous movie by Mel Gibson, The Passion of the Christ. One of the exquisitely accurate historical moments in the movie is the use of language. So you have the figure of Christ speaking in Aramaic, and this was one of the impulses, I think, of the filmmaker to give it this authenticity. So Jesus spoke Aramaic, spoke to his mother in Aramaic, spoke to some of his disciples in Aramaic, but that character also was a very typical Jew of the time, very typical Eastern Mediterranean, Middle Easterner of the time, in that he was a polyglot. So he was speaking to his jailers in Greek, because Greek was the language of the masses at the time. So Greek came after Aramaic, and it became the language of the masses. He spoke to the administrator, to the governor at the time, to the representative of Caesar in Palestine, in Latin, because that was the language of administration. The fact that he was multilingual did not denude him of his identity. So what I'm trying to say is that because of its geographic location at the crossroads of three continents, the Eastern Mediterranean, the area we refer to as the Near East or the Middle East, it saw processions of conquerors and civilizations. Some of them stayed for a long time, others were mere passers-by. They left a few imprints and left and quit the area. But their traces have remained in the fact that a lot of the peoples of the Middle East do have maintained memories of these times, still speak languages that are connected to these languages. And as I began saying, from Sumerian we moved into Babylonian, into Aramaic, into Persian, then Greek, then Latin, then Turkish, then Arabic again, and French and English towards the end of the 19th century and beginning 20th century. So that's the story of my book.